What is up, my people? My name's Anthony and welcome back to September. Today we're going to take a little peek into some rope simulations for the first time. I was messing around with some scenes today and I managed to create some pretty cool results with some forces in a particular force setup with some attractors and turbulence. And this is kind of what it looks like. I'm going to show you what it looks like if we play it through super quick. The live viewer will not update that quick, but you can see we get some pretty cool tangling movement. If we move it back to hidden line, we can kind of see we get some cool organic movement. So you can animate it, add some motion blur in there. It looks pretty sick. If you zoom out of the camera real quick, we can see that this is kind of what our setup looks like. I chose to sort of render out in a sort of like black or white way, but you can choose to do it how you want. And there's a barrier just here, so that's kind of a little insight into how you make it, and I'll take you through it in just a sec. But generally pretty cool. The reason this looks so glitchy is because of the textures, so do not worry, we'll fix that up, but create some pretty nice looks. So without chatting anymore, let's get straight into it. So what we're going to do for now is going to close down the live viewer, hop into here and see what we can do. So the way rope simulations work is ultimately they're not on the, so let me just start from square one. The way you want to create a rope is doing this. So what you want to do is grab yourself firstly a path which the rope is going to follow. So in this case we're going to grab a helix. Just seems to sort of like cover more area. And what we can do with this is turn up the end angle a little bit, or rather turn down the start angle, and that's going to start to create more curls. So the way that's working is obviously imagine going from minus 720 degrees to 720 up here. There's going to be more curls involved, and that's cool. So we can turn up the height a little bit and just generally scale this up. And the way you got to think about this is we almost want this to sort of collapse upon a midpoint. So the more curls and the more like sort of area it sort of like takes over, the more equal it's going to be. And that's the way you got to think about it. So that's step one, right? You're essentially picking the path that your rope is initially going to follow, and this means nothing other than the first frame. It's just creating the structure. If we increase the length of our time period here, all we want to do next is pick the diameter, or rather the diameter of the rope, right? So how thick it's going to be. So we can turn this down to about 10. That means we're going to have a 10 centimeter rope going all the way around. And the actual like functionality for this, the action is the sweep. If we drag both of these in, you'll see we'll fill and get our rope. Now in this case, I'm going to turn this down a little bit. Always seems to look a little better with the sphere, with the circle rather than the actual sphere. So we can turn this down and fit this to something like this for now. Just to show the basics of the rope simulations, I'm going to do a setup like this. You can get a little more complicated with like spline wraps. Say you wanted to like wrap belts or like shoelaces or all sorts of stuff. You can. We'll get into that in a later video. But for now, this is sort of just like an introduction. And this is the start of this is essentially like the geometry, the modeling, whatever stage of your rope. When in terms of applying simulations, what you want to do is apply it to the helix. So we'll get into that in a little sec. But what we want to do is sort of alter the start position of this real quick. So we want to sort of like murk this up a little more. Pretty cool way of doing that is if we take the sweep out real quick, we can sort of edit it with this helix. If we grab ourselves a twist and actually drag that into the helix there, select fit parent, we can see we can muck around with this and get some pretty cool twirls like this. If we just hide the twist, we can see we're almost getting some like sort of abstract sphere looks here. And the more you warp it at this point, the cooler it's kind of going to look. So what we can do is also we can change the height. The good thing about this is that it's all changeable. You don't have to bake anything off. So you can change the height bias. You can switch the subdivisions. This is going to become important later on, but we can probably leave it about 100. Change the radial bias. That's sort of like, you can't see it here, but it's how the helix gets sort of like pushed. You can change the end radius, all this stuff to sort of create different results. I might switch this up a little bit just to murk it up a little more. And I'm pretty happy with that. So if you are too, you can drag that in and you're creating geometry for that spline now. Now what you want to do is start thinking about the forces that you'd use to sort of compact this to a point. So let's start from square one by applying ourselves a rope simulator. rope tag even, and that's essentially what you've done now. You've created rope, and we need to head to mode. We need to go to simulation here and just set our gravity to 0 so it's not going to fall around the place. And if we hit play, it's probably not going to do too much, but believe me, this is now rope. So we can, let's start this off just by getting ourselves a little bit of, go to simulate forces and just grab ourselves some turbulence. We can drag that into our force field or force selector part here. Set this to maybe strength of 50 and a strength scale of 200, just so it's quite high. And we can see how that affects our rope. So already there we can see, because we've got no gravity, we're sort of just having this rope flail around in space. If you're looking at this and you're not happy because it's quite chunky or like rather stringy, you'll see what I mean. It depends where you got your subdivisions at, but the lower you have them, you'll see these like sort of straight bits, and the more like almost like pipey it will look. If you want to fix that, just whack up your subdivisions here. I seem to find that 100 works pretty well, and then for a final render you can always put it into a subdivision surface. So let's just save it off. And that is the basis for like the first force that you apply to your rope. Now, if you want to get a result similar to the one I had in the other video, what you really want to do is have a barrier in the middle. So for that, I had a cylinder which sort of like faced towards the camera, and then some attractor forces with torus fields which sort of brought it into the middle. But if you remember, attractor fields tend to sort of like glitch out of geometry a little bit when they meet the midpoint, right? So that's the reason you use the torus field. So it's only around a certain area, and then when it gets brought into the middle, sort of floats about, and if it manages to escape to a specified like radius, it sort of brings it back in again, right? So that's kind of what we want to achieve. It depends what you want. So even if we, for example, got a barrier here and just whacked up the collision substeps a bit, you'd get a pretty like, I don't know, hectic result, I guess. I mean, you can see we're getting a little bit of intersection with these ropes as well. So if we just, while we're working on that here, we can turn up the collision passes to something like 10. That should fix that for us. It might make the simulation work a little longer, but we should generally get less intersection. We are still getting some there. So let's try potentially turn down the substeps. Let's take a look at how that looks. Starting to get a little bit, maybe if we work with the, turn them up to 50. Let's take a look, have a little play with the settings, sort of see what works for you. I'm noticing less intersection on that part, so that kind of worked. You want to work hand in hand with your, I say that and I'm pausing and I still see intersection. You want to work hand in hand kind of with your subdivisions here as well. If you set that to 50, it should start to work a little better. But regardless, we're going to give a shot at creating some of those attractor fields. So if we head back and just pause this simulation real quick, what we can do is head to simulate up here, forces, and get ourselves an attractor. If we plug that into our forces here, you can start to get an idea of what that does. That will literally, if we head in here, turn the strength up to something like, I think I had the last one about 20,000 almost, quite high. You can get the force, and you can see how it's just going to bring it in and sort of bundle it all together. You can see our rather subdivisions are quite low, so you bring that up to 100 again. We can see we're getting a whole lot of craziness, and it just wraps it into a ball, and that's pretty much all it does. So if you wanted to create almost like a rubber band ball, that would be a way of doing it, but bear it in mind. I almost want to turn these up, so I'm working with as many substeps as I kind of possibly can. And this is where some of the settings in here kind of work. So let's try mess around with this a little bit. If we head out to our starting position, we can go in here and grab ourselves a torus field. Scale this up a little bit to about, I'd say 500, maybe a little less, maybe like 300. 400 is probably bang in the middle. Perfect. And we can turn the thickness of this up so it works a bit better. Not 500, maybe 250. And you'll see that that's created a shape whereby in the middle that attractor won't be effective, but it will be effective to like give the momentum to the outside. So ideally what we should see, I really want to toggle that invisible, we can play, and we're getting it brought to the middle but not bundled into a ball, right? And we're getting it dragged around a little bit, so maybe let's try. So you can see what's happening there is it's getting brought out and sort of dragged under. So it's sort of done its job, but it's kind of escaping. So we can take that and sort of try fix it to our best of our ability by duplicating this torus field, or rather heading back to a tractor. Control C, Control V. Can we do that? Duplicate. There we go. So we can hop here and we can change the orientation of this to X. What do we want? That's creating two of exactly the same. Never mind. We grab ourselves another torus field like that. We can set that here. Make sure we're getting the same measurements. So 400, 200. They look like this. And ideally, that should now catch it where it escapes and bring it back to the middle like we kind of want it to. And we're getting a bit of a better result. Just like that. Brings it back. And you're almost getting this rope that's dragged about. So let's take a look here a little more. It's really escaping like crazy. But if we take these, maybe make the tractor a little more powerful, we can go back, click on these and turning up the thickness a little bit. So that's 200. Let's make that 250. And let's see what our results kind of looking like. We're getting these strings bundled about, getting a little bit of collision, but we can try fix that. Generally, it's looking pretty cool. So another thing we can do at this point is sort of, you can also change this. Like I said, you can head back into your helix here. You can change your height, so that's going to scale them around a little more. You can just generally scale up your helix too. So that's going to make it obviously a lot bigger. It doesn't matter, because as long as the sort of geometry falls into the bounds of these torus fields, it should drag it all in, because it's pretty interconnected. So you can always just play it, see what you're working with. This is pretty hectic, but you're getting the basis of the simulation there. So there's not a lot to worry about. If we were to go down the road of the last render, we could literally head up here. We'd probably grab ourselves Octane dialogue real quick. Just get ourselves Octane camera, plug that in, maybe change the resolution to something like 1280 by 1000, I think it was. You can head here, you can change the coordinates, find wherever that is. So it's just here. You can see it's bundling in there. So what you want to do is you can find where that camera is. Just grab yourself a cylinder in this case. So I was going to do a sphere, but what you find is it sort of like crosses in front of the viewer camera. So instead I got myself a cylinder like this, rotated it 90 degrees and just extended it out like this. So it's almost like a pipe that it's bending around. And then just head into the camera here, and you can sort of pick how thick you want it to be, right? So we can also toggle that invisible, go here, simulation tags, just grab ourselves a collider real quick. And you can see, if we just toggle this visible, we want to make sure there's no intersection of the actual rope here. Doesn't look like there is, so we're probably good. We can scale it up even more, maybe to something like this. And then go about toggling that invisible. That will now collide. And we can increase our focal length, maybe something like 80. Give it a play and see what result we're getting. So we're still getting it pretty wrapped round. We're getting a little bit of escapism around these edges, which is pretty cool. And that's where you have the freedom of sort of grabbing your torus fields and even turning the thickness down to maybe 150. This is all going to create a little bit of a different result with a little bit more like flailing around out here. It depends how trapped you want your rope to be. And generally, that's a pretty good idea of forces. Also, bear in mind, we've got the turbulence still affecting this. So we've got a pretty high scale, 50 centimeter turbulence. If we wanted to make that 10, maybe have that toned down a little bit. You can sort of dial this in and out how you want. This is getting a pretty cool result here. I'm sort of thinking at this point, figuring out how I can work these sort of intersections out a little bit. I'm aware that we've got collision passes here. I've already got that on 20. I didn't really have that before. Maybe even turning the iterations up to 5. I'm unsure, but let's give it a play. These are the settings which sort of typically... We need to head to rope here, I just remembered, and set the radius up. So we're working with a radius here of 6 centimeters. So if we hop in here and just turn the radius to 6 there, we should have a more synchronized simulation. and in hopes our collisions are fixed and we're getting some nicer looking rope renders here. You can also whack some rotations in, of course, do all sorts of stuff. If you want more movement, motion graphic based stuff, you need to control it a little more, you can cache it out and do what you want with it that way. But for now, I think this is a pretty good introduction into kind of like what I wanted to show. Something I sort of had to bear in mind as well when working with this was, if I really quickly cache, actually it doesn't matter, the sort of like a distance of your camera kind of matters. I initially had a angle whereby it was very far away, so I had something like this and a focal length almost like 500, which looked a little crazy, but it was something like this. It looked good, but it sort of lacked the depth, and it almost looked like this was like sort of colliding on like one plane. And then I moved it a little closer, maybe something, I think it's at the focal length like 80. I had it even closer than this, and suddenly these bits really get brought out a little more and it looks far nicer, especially if you start applying depth of field. So if at this point you're happy with the way this looks, you can hop in here, you can cache your scene, so we can do that. If you're still having issues with collisions, try turning up or down your sub steps and just make sure your thickness is synchronized. Try messing with the subdivisions in Helix and hopefully things go your way, but it tends to be the one thing with simulations that are a bit iffy at the moment, and jittering and intersections. So just work with it and you should be pretty good. But for now, this is about to render out, cache it out, and we can try a little bit of material generation. So the last one I didn't even bother UV, and I kind of just left it on because I wanted that wiry look, and it achieved it pretty well. But if we grab Octane, if we undock it and just get that to the side here, we can shoot this a real quick render, make sure we're locked in, ACES path tracing, and give this a little play. And we should get an idea of what our render currently looks like. So this is obviously the more zoomed in angle, but I think it generally looks pretty good. We're getting some nice little signs here. So they've got the subdivisions on 200 here. There's not really too much we can edit with that for the minute. We just have to sort of work with what we got. We got some strange sort of like bends here, so bear that in mind if you're editing your helix here. It may be the radial bias or one of those settings that you're sort of tweaking with. So dial that in and out as you need. But generally we're getting a pretty similar result. So if you wanted to add a little more detail to this, at this point we could get ourselves a subdivision surface, plug that in, and you'll see it's going to sort of like smooth out all those little bits. So that's going to look pretty cool. And then we can go about lighting this. I've done enough videos on lighting, I'm sure. So if you need a little more interest, you can sort of like go back and learn. But it's a basis of grabbing a HDRI in this case, just getting ourselves a ACES CG, loading up some HDRIs and picking anything that you've really got. There are plenty of websites, by the way. I realise I pull this up in all my videos. HDRI Haven's a really good one. Just make sure you're using EXRs in general, and your quality should be pretty good with HDRI. So just like search for what you want. I tend to have more like with directional HDRIs. I've mentioned that a lot. So sort of like light coming from one side rather than light coming from all over. Tends to add a lot more depth in 3D. I've just imported that the wrong way. You need to make sure you click here and then grab something like this. And then we can sort of just rotate this around to create the look that we're after. So if you want a little bit of backlighting, you can do that. I'm pretty happy with the shadows in this, so we can save that off. And then if you want to give yourself a white background, of course, you can just grab yourself an Octane image texture, head back to your library of HDRs, and we can potentially just grab ourselves a white look like this. Plug it in, make sure we're working at ACES, just make sure that's set to visible environment, and you should start to get some nice grays, which you can then render over, and generally you're getting a pretty cool look here. And that is how you sort of about going and getting your rope simulation working. Obviously it goes without saying the majority of this is sort of like art direction, so I kind of want to leave you guys to art direct how you will. If you want to add lasers in this, you can get the spline wrap tool and a few other little processes. So if you want another video on that, do let me know. But as a little introduction, you can create some pretty cool results with this. So of course, mess with the forces. I've done videos before where you can sort of like keyframe forces, which is also pretty sick. And this works just like anything else. with attractors and stuff. So if you wanted to keyframe the attractors around, you wanted to increase the depth of these torus fields or reduce them, you could do that too. Or if you even wanted to switch this around and sort of get some new angles, you could. It is entirely in 3D space and you have the freedom to do that. So without any further ado, thank you everybody for watching. I hope I was clear, and you can follow along if you have anything that you've made. Please tag me, I'd love to see it. And with that being said, thank you for watching. So I'll see you in the next video.